The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
All right, good morning, everyone. Andrew Zimmerman here at the National Weather Service Wakefield with our Monday morning briefing. Um, Thank you for all who have joined this morning. Kind of coming off an unsettled weekend here, and as we can see here, with got the satellite latest visible satellite image loop here, along with the radar overlaid. That front that kind of brought us the unsettled conditions through the weekend has really kind of dropped south into North Carolina. So north of that front, a lot of clouds, some isolated showers, maybe a few little more intense or a little heavier activity there, just kind of southwest of the Albemarle Sound, but north of that, just generally kind of some isolated light showers into northeast North Carolina and kind of back into the eastern Virginia Piedmont. But we're going to see kind of a lot of that continue today, and that front will be the main focal point of any additional development we see later this afternoon and into this evening. Switching over here, kind of looking at a broad overview for the coming week. You can see as we start the day here on Monday with this stationary front just into northern North Carolina, we're going to see that kind of sit there for the next 24 hours or so. That being the main focal point for additional activity this afternoon and evening. As we get into the day tomorrow here, this would be 8 a.m. Tuesday. That front still kind of in vicinity of the Virginia North Carolina border, but then during the day it lifts back to the north as a warm front that will bring the potential for some additional showers and thunderstorms Tuesday afternoon and evening, and also a return to more like hotter and more humid conditions, more summer-like conditions, especially as we move through the week and actually approach the summer solstice. As we get into Wednesday and then Thursday, you can see that front well to our north now. Another approaching cold front remains well to our west. So as we get into the day Wednesday and Thursday, looking at some rather hot and humid conditions. So definitely a taste of midsummer as we get into especially Wednesday and Thursday. That front will bring a chance of some additional thunderstorms later Thursday, and then that does push through here by Friday. Maybe takes a few degrees off the temperature Friday into Saturday. Maybe knocks the humidity back slightly, but it's not a particularly strong front. But then as we get later in the weekend into early next week, kind of that you see that Bermuda high tries to set back up, and there are some indications that we get as we get into next week that we get some hot and increasingly humid conditions returning as we begin summer. Looking a little more detail here for today. This is the HRRR model starting at noon today. And as we step through the afternoon, you can see a lot of that activity initially down into eastern North Carolina. But as we get into the afternoon, see the model depicting some development into southern, southeast Virginia, and northeast North Carolina. As we get into now we're around 8 p.m., you still see some of that isolated scattered activity. And that just kind of lingers through midnight to 2 a.m. and then gradually some weakens overnight, but could have some additional showers, maybe shifting a little farther north later tonight into very early Tuesday morning. Revisiting some of our highlights here for the upcoming week. Still unsettled today, tomorrow. We do have a flood watch that does remain in effect for northeast North Carolina. That's a lot of that's based on what we're some of the antecedent conditions from some of the heavy rain we've had over the weekend. So any additional rain could cause some flooding issues, but that flood watch at this time is contained in northeast North Carolina. Again, we see that, like I mentioned, the much warmer conditions developing through the week. This looks like at this point peaking Wednesday and Thursday. Our northern beaches do have a moderate risk of rip currents for today, and marine weather generally through midweek looking at sub-advisory conditions. Here you can see where the flood watch is, basically all of our Northeast North Carolina counties for our forecast area are in the flood watch today. Looking at the convective outlook, just looking at general thunder today, but with that warm front lifting north tomorrow, we do have the marginal risk of severe thunderstorms does come into the eastern Virginia Piedmont. And then just back to general thunder on Wednesday. Looking at a little more detail on Tuesday, main threat is damaging wind gusts and looking at generally the 3 to 10 p.m. time frame for timing. Looking ahead to Thursday, at this point we are outlooked for day 4 ahead of that next cold front. Basically, I mean, starting out with very hot conditions or relatively hot conditions for the time of year ahead of that cold front. And again, probably at this point, the main threat would be damaging wind gusts. Looking at our excessive rainfall outlook today, you do see that slight risk still down into Northeast North Carolina does creep up into Southern Virginia, kind of in the southern Piedmont counties. As we move to Tuesday and Wednesday, though, the excessive rainfall threat Tuesday does shift to the northwest of our local area. Rainfall wise, looking at today, primarily going to be contained across the south here, and then maybe shifting up kind of into the Piedmont then as we get Tuesday. Again, overall, not significantly high amounts, but locally there could be some higher amounts, especially in Northeast North Carolina, which could combine with some of those areas that are fairly wet to begin with. Overall forecast precipitation as we go through the next week, generally on the lighter side, outside of any localized higher amounts, and most of that being within today, tomorrow, then Thursday, then kind of trending a little drier for the weekend. Looking at the heat situation, we do see some Wednesday and Thursday, especially Southeast Virginia, Northeast North Carolina, could see some heat indices approaching 105. So kind of getting close to our heat advisory criteria there as we get into Wednesday and Thursday. So something to certainly keep an eye out. We're starting to turn toward more of a summertime weather pattern. The tropics remain quiet at this time. Really not a whole lot out there. Really not any tropical cyclone activity expected in the Atlantic the next 7 days, and then the general outlook remains pretty quiet in the Atlantic basin to close out the month of June. Looking ahead to next week, favoring above normal temperatures, like I mentioned earlier, could end up being rather hot into next week. Generally near normal precipitation chances next week. On the marine side of things, primarily sub-advisory through midweek. As we get a little later on in the week, maybe could see a modest increase in southerly to southwesterly flow out ahead of that next cold front. Maybe some marginal small craft advisory criteria conditions in the Chesapeake Bay and potentially the lower James River as well, but certainly on the low end side, nothing high end. But with that, I think that should pretty much wrap up the main highlights for the coming week. As we have been doing more recently now, we'll have our routine updates of our briefings that will be available online, and then we'll be back here on Thursday for our Thursday weekly briefing. So I will conclude with that. Thank everyone for their attendance this morning, and I will be happy to take any questions that anyone may have.